Why was an innocent girl married to 4 grown men? The cruel men continued to treat the girl in such a horrifying manner that witnessing it would send chills down anyone's soul. Today's story will surely bring tears to your eyes. This is a sorrowful tale of an innocent girl. Watch this story till the end. The girl who suffered this injustice was 20 years old. Crying and stumbling, she reached Sultan's court. The king's court was in session, and the ruler was listening to the petitions of all those present. The girl began to cry. She cried so much that she eventually fainted. She couldn't utter a single word from her lips. When the Sultan saw the girl faint after crying so much, he stood up in distress. He was deeply troubled, wondering what sorrow the girl carried. Even the courtiers sitting in the palace were greatly disturbed upon seeing her. The Sultan quickly ordered his soldiers to. The Sultan ordered that water be splashed on the girl's face to revive her, so she could regain consciousness immediately, and he could hear what petition she had brought. The healer was called quickly. The healer checked the girl's pulse and said that she was very weak and had fainted due to exhaustion. After a while, when the girl regained consciousness, she started crying again. The Sultan placed his hand on her head and said, "My daughter, don't worry. You are standing in my palace now. Tell me, what trouble are you facing?" The Sultan made the girl sit on a chair and allowed her to drink some water. Then the girl said to the Sultan, "O Sultan, I have come to you with a sorrowful story." The innocent girl, crying, began to speak. "O Sultan, my life is in danger. Please save me, or they will tear me apart and eat me alive. I have been enduring this torment for a long time." The girl was sitting in front of everyone. All were silent, wanting to understand what had happened to her. The Sultan placed his hand on the girl's head again and said, "My daughter, tell me your story in detail. Explain what has happened to you." The girl began telling her painful story. "O Sultan, when I was 10 years old, my parents lived together. My mother often cried and told me that your father is a drunkard. He abuses me and beats me. Your father is not a good person. At that time, I was young and couldn't understand these things. My parents fought every day. One day, the fighting escalated so much that my father, in clear words, gave my mother 3 divorces. And she was divorced. After that, my mother told me, 'My daughter, I can't stay here anymore. Your father has divorced me. Let's go somewhere else.' My mother took me and left. I cried to my mother, 'I want to stay with both you and father.' My mother said, 'My dear daughter, if your father is doing injustice to me, if he beats me, I could tolerate it, but now he has divorced me. I can't live with him anymore. So, daughter, your father is not a good man. You come with me.' The girl continued. My mother then took me to my uncle's house. My uncle clearly told her, 'Oh sister, if you want to live here, you may stay, but I cannot keep your daughter with me. The reason is that your daughter is entering her youth, and I have 4 grown sons. If something inappropriate happens, there will be problems, and I cannot disgrace my honor. Therefore, sister, I can keep you here, but not your daughter.' My mother, crying, said to me, 'My dear daughter, now I have no choice but to.' My mother could not keep me with her. At that time, my mother brought me to my father's house and left me there. And she went to stay at her brother's house. I was crying while looking at my father. My father placed his hand on my head and reassured me, saying, 'Don't worry, your father is with you.' Then I realized that my father wasn't as bad as my mother made him out to be. But at that time, I was an ignorant child and didn't understand the difference between good and bad. After that, when I started living with my father, I noticed that when it was almost midnight, women would come into my father's room, lock the door with him inside, and leave in the morning. At that time, I was an unaware child and couldn't understand what was happening. In the morning, My father would hand money to those women, and they would leave. But my father was kind to me. Every day, he would ask me what I wanted to eat, what to cook, and if I needed anything. At that time, I thought that my father treated me well, but I couldn't understand what was going on, and I couldn't make sense of it. In this way, 16 years passed in my father's house. When I turned 16, my father arranged my marriage with his friend. The man was older than me, but I accepted the fact that the husband is to be respected by his wife, and the wife should take care of him. I accepted the relationship in my heart, understanding that even though my husband was older than me, I would always keep him happy. I had learned how to live by observing the world around me. Now, my husband took me to his home, and 2 days had passed since our marriage. One day, I was cooking food in my house when my husband came home from outside. I immediately got up, went to my husband, and asked him how his day had gone and where he had been. Hearing this, my husband became furious and slapped me hard across the face. At that time, I was a weak, unaware girl, and I couldn't bear the slap. I started screaming and crying. After being slapped, I became completely scared and terrified of my husband. My husband then said to me, "You have the audacity to ask me where I went." He continued, "I don't like women who interfere in their husband's life. That's why I'm giving you a divorce." My husband gave me 3 divorces and cast me out of his life. He told me to go back to my father's house. I was crying and wondering, what was my fault? What did I do wrong? Was it such a huge mistake that I couldn't even ask where he had been or how his day was? At that time, I thought to myself, was this really such a huge mistake? But what could I do? Now that my husband had divorced me, I had become forbidden to him. I was forced to return to my father's house. Crying and sobbing, I arrived at my father's house and told him about the injustice that had happened to me. How my husband had divorced me. My father, placing his hand on my head, said, "My daughter, maybe your husband wasn't good. That's why he divorced you. Allah will question him for it." With that, my father left. I was deeply troubled by my father's reaction. I was forced to think, did my father not even feel the need to go and ask that man why he had divorced his daughter? My father just told me, "Your husband wasn't good. Allah will question him." I didn't give much attention to his words, but I stayed silent and continued living at my father's house. According to Islamic law, when a woman's husband divorces her or passes away, she must observe a waiting period, called iddat, during which she stays at home for 4 months and 10 days. After this period, the girl, when the 4 months and 10 days of my waiting period, iddat, were completed, my father arranged my 3rd marriage. I began pleading with my father, saying, "Father, it has only been 1.5 months since my divorce. I haven't even gotten over the pain of my first husband. How can I marry again?" But my father didn't listen to a single word I said. He told me, "Not all husbands are the same. You will be happy with this one." Saying this, my father arranged my 2nd marriage. I got married and moved to my 2nd husband's house. He kept me for 3 days. And on the 4th day, without any reason, he divorced me. He also gave me divorce without any explanation. Now, my forehead bore the mark of divorce twice. When I returned to my father's house, he ignored my feelings, and I once again had to observe the waiting period, iddat. After 4 months and 10 days of my 2nd iddat period, my father told me that he was arranging my 3rd marriage. He said, "You should settle down and have your own home." I was enduring so much pain and injustice. I began pleading with my father, saying, "Please, Father, forgive me and save me from these people. Don't marry me off again. I can't bear this cruelty anymore. Why do you keep marrying me off again and again? If I have become a burden to you, leave me at an orphanage." But please, father, don't do this to me. Don't marry me off again. Only to be taken away by strangers who use me for a few days and then divorce me. If this man also does the same, if he keeps me for 2 days and then divorces me, what will I do? My life will be ruined. Don't destroy my life. Quote, my father, angrily scolding me, said, you will marry, otherwise, things will not go well for you. Hearing this hatred-filled response from my father, I fell silent. What else could I do? My father married me off to a third man. And I went to the third man's house. But this third man was even worse than the first two. I was shocked to think that the man I was marrying now was even worse than the first one. This third man was very cruel and much older than me. He would beat me over the smallest things. He would beat me so much that blood would start pouring from my nose and mouth. My nights passed in pain. And I would cry all day, thinking that maybe this is my fate, that I was born to suffer like this. My third husband was such a monster that he would always taunt me by mentioning my first 2 husbands, saying, where did your first 2 husbands touch you? Then he would burn my body with hot coals. I would scream and beg him, pleading with him not to inflict such cruelty on me. But the more I cried, the more the tyrant would torment me. This continued, and eventually, my third husband divorced me by saying 3 divorces. Talak. Now, the mark of 3 divorces was on my forehead. The girl, crying bitterly, was telling her story to the king in the royal court, and all those present in the court were shedding tears upon hearing her painful tale. The girl, sobbing, said to the king, I have been divorced 3 times. And I don't know where my father is. When I returned to my father's house, he wanted to arrange my 4th marriage. But that's when the whole truth was revealed. I begged my father, pleading with him, please forgive me and do not subject me to such humiliation. Do not make me marry into such cruel families. My father replied, I have spent so much money on you. Where will I recover that money from? If I don't arrange your marriage, how will I get that money back? When my father started arranging my 4th marriage with an old man, that old man handed 3 bags full of things to my father. At that moment, I realized that my father must have sold my dignity for money in the first 3 marriages as well. The truth hit me hard. I now understood that my father was using marriage as a way to sell me off and make money. When my father arranged my marriage to the 4th old man, everything became clear to me. I had now understood the truth. When I realized what my father had been doing, I made up my mind to come and tell you my painful story. In the first 3 marriages, I didn't know what my father was doing. But now, everything was crystal clear. When my father married me off to the 4th man, who was worse than all the others, he tortured me terribly. His cruelty was unbearable. I felt like I was neither alive nor dead, with no moment of peace. He would torment me constantly. Finally, when I couldn't take it anymore, I spoke out, and when I spoke, he immediately gave me a divorce. He dragged me by the hand and brought me back to my father's house. Now, I am back in my father's house. My father sells me off in the name of marriage, bargains with my dignity. Now I understand what was happening to me. I didn't know before, but now I know everything. If I had known earlier, I would have come to you. Now, I have escaped from my father's house. I have come to you, stumbling on my own feet. Please help me. That girl cried and said, now, my father calls a man home almost every day and sells my dignity for money. I have been ruined, destroyed. Oh Sultan, please help me. When the Sultan heard the girl's heartbreaking story, he became furious. He looked at the girl and said, don't worry, daughter. We will definitely help you. The Sultan tells the girl, go back to your home. That is, go back to your father's house, and orders the minister to accompany her secretly. You must go quietly. and her father must not find out. The minister then returns with the girl and hides in the room where she stays. The Sultan also arranges guards outside the house, but no one knows what's going on. The minister hides in the girl's room. The girl's father enters and says, "Here are some clothes. Get ready and sit properly." After a while, a man enters the room and tries to force himself on the girl. At that moment, the minister steps out from his hiding place. The man is startled and asks, "Who are you?" The minister pulls out his dagger and strikes the man's foot. A scream is heard from the girl's room, which causes the girl's father and the guards outside to rush in immediately. Upon seeing the scene inside, the girl's father is shocked because the minister is present. The guards capture the minister and the girl's father and bring them along with the girl to the Sultan's court. The Sultan, with great anger, begins questioning them. The girl's father confesses his crimes and admits that he had done injustice to his own daughter by handing her over to those cruel men who tortured her and divorced her without any reason. The Sultan punishes all the wrongdoers severely. The girl's father is hanged in the middle of the city, and the women are ordered to throw stones at him until he dies. The girl's husbands are thrown into prison and given no food or water until they die from hunger and thirst. The Sultan reassures the girl and says, "Daughter, if you wish, you may stay in this palace. If you need anything, just let us know." The Sultan reassures the girl, saying that she will be helped. But upon hearing this, the girl suddenly faints. The royal physician arrives and tells the Sultan, "This girl has suffered much. Her wounds are very deep, and her survival is nothing short of a miracle." Despite all efforts, the physician is unable to save the girl's life as her soul departs. The entire court is devastated and sorrowful, thinking of the countless wounds and pain this girl must have hidden in her heart. And with those very wounds, she passed away. The story of this girl ends here. If we talk about today's world, we still hear such incidents every day in the news. Incidents that make one's heart shudder. Somewhere, a young girl is suffering, and in other places, countless people are affected, their hearts shattering upon hearing the news. Reports of abuse against innocent children, the killing of doctors, and the cruelty and oppression that still exist in the world are shocking. Some people, who play with the honor of innocent girls, have no shame. This story may have been from the past, but such events still happen today and serve as lessons for us. Friends, I hope you have learned something from today's story. As always, I request that you like and subscribe to the channel so that you can stay connected to the African Tales 2.0 and keep receiving such lessons in future videos. Thank you.